Welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. On this episode, we're going to focus on in-season nitrogen and what your plants may desire and really need at this critical time of growth. Also joining us from Nashville is Jody Lawrence. Jody's going to visit with us a little bit about the commodity markets and really what's going on around the global scene. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. In our studio today is brand manager Jason Gregory, and Jason is the brand manager for the Coron brands. Jason, welcome to FieldLink.
Hey, excited to be back again to talk about my favorite product line.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about Coron Metra today. And Coron Metra it's not exactly a new product. Coron's been in the market for a long time, 30, 40 years or so. But Metra is somewhat new, and a lot of growers may not be familiar with Metra. So, Jason, why don't we step back a little bit, peel the onion here, and let's talk about Coron Metra and what kind of value it brings to the producer.
Well, I tell you, Bill, the history of that, it's been around about 6 or 7 years, and I get real excited when I'm talking about it because I happen to be in the room when the whole concept came about. You know, we were looking because, to your point, Coron's been around for, 40 years. You know, how do we kind of differentiate? We've got a lot of lookalikes out there, right?
Yeah, a lot of people coming in wanting to be the wannabes, right?
Absolutely. The old same as Helen Only, cheaper line,
Yeah.
And you run into that, and sometimes it's hard to see the difference on a turn row. Mm-hmm. It really is. But, we were looking for ways to differentiate it, and I still remember Johnny Roberts. Everybody's heard that
Sure.
name, right? If you've heard the FieldLink podcast, you've probably heard him talk.
And Johnny Roberts, he's retired now, but formulation master, if we'll call him that, for over 44 years with Elena, and brought a lot of unique products to the market.
Absolutely. But we were just sitting around just talking, kind of what happens, when you do some things, you just spitballing, throwing things up on the wall. And he said, well, I don't know, maybe we can add ENC to it, and then it's like a light went off, in his mind there. And to be honest with you, I left that meeting, never heard anything else about it until about 2 years later. And then I'm at a big sales meeting, and we're launching Coron Metra. And they're like, well, we added ENC formulation technology to it. I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me.
Changed the game overnight.
At 100%. And so they spent those 2 years just testing, the addition of ENC formulation technology, which we do with every product we launch, right? And just saw consistent results time and time again across all crops just by adding that little special package, that we have of ENC formulation technology to it. So
and change the game overnight. Okay, so for some of our listeners, Jason, some of them may not know what Coron is. Let's start there, and then let's talk a little bit what ENC formulation is, and talk a little bit about that.
So our Coron brands stand for controlled release nitrogen, and we have several different formulations. We start with our tech brand, our 2800.
Sure.
And then, we have a 2500, 2500B, a 10010, and a 10010B.
Lots of formulations depending upon the situation for nitrogen.
Absolutely, yes. And not just nitrogen, but a lot of folks, here across the southern part of our regions are really dependent on that potassium part as well.
Sure, yeah.
But, anyway, so what we go back to is just delivering that controlled release technology just a little bit at a time. We've learned a lot over the last few years, especially, the whole concept of spoon feeding, right?
Right.
Just diving a little bit in at a time and driving that nitrogen or that potassium in over a period of a couple of weeks.
Sure.
And just is a phenomenal way to deliver those nutrients into the crop in kind of a controlled environment where you can get those incremental additives over time and just kind of build that building block, if you will, to perform better.
Well, I understand what you're saying, though, because it's really important for growers to spoon feed their, specifically nitrogen in this case and potassium as well. But in a year like this year across much of the country, where if we load up with our nitrogen or drier urea, whatever form of, fertility you have, and then we get the rain that we've had, especially throughout the Delta here. I mean, I know we're recording this prior to Memorial Weekend, and they're calling for up to 6 inches down here again.
Oh, yes.
That the denitrification process, leaching, it's really going to impact a lot of those crops, and the investment a lot of producers have made. The unique thing about Coron is it lets us come back from the liquid format over the top and feed that crop when it needs it.
Absolutely. It gives you a lot of options, and to be honest with you, it gives you options to come back when you've lost some nutrients out there. I made the joke the other day, living here in the Memphis area, I think Noah's building an ark in my backyard right now. I mean,
it seems like it, yeah.
I cannot get that thing dried out. And a lot of our fields are the same way. I was just driving through the Arkansas Delta yesterday, and you see so many fields that aren't planted,
Sure.
And a lot of places have already applied some nutrients out there, and you're like, oh, my goodness, where's it going to go? And I think that's why it's important. And, we were going to dive into ENC technology, but I think now's the time to really talk about, too, extractor.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. I mean, if you've already put your nutrients out there or some nutrients out there and you want to know, what did I lose? Did I lose some?
Right.
What's my crop uptaking? Do I still have the nutrients there to make the kind of yield that I need to be profitable on my farm?
Well, an extractor, so some of our listeners may not be familiar with extractor. That's a tool in our toolkit from our Agri-Intelligence team that really takes a tissue sample but puts it into a proprietary software that helps us analyze what's going on in that crop right then.
Absolutely, no question. And it looks at all the factors. What's your crop yield go? What's your type of growth stage and all those things, and puts it in there, and then gives you an idea of, hey, what are the type of things that I need to do to get to where I need to be? Is it coming back over the top with some Coron Metra, or is it another product? I mean, you may be a little bit low in magnesium, and now all of a sudden we've got to supplement a little bit of that there too. So.
Yeah, what I love about that extractor system, Jason, is it takes really a complex topic and simplifies it.
Yes, it does.
It makes it super simple for a producer to really interpret and understand, and really guides them to what action they need to take.
Exactly. And I love the fact, and it sounds so simple, but I love the red, yellow, green. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, just red is bad.
Yep.
Green is good. I mean,
it's very intuitive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It takes a lot of the complexity out. Okay, Jason, so we've talked a little bit about Coron being a really great product to spoon feed, specifically nitrogen and others products as well, even boron in some mixes. But great opportunity there. But as you mentioned, Coron changed. It went through an evolution to change what nobody else has in the industry.
That's
so
right.
There are no more lookalikes, if you will, by adding that ENC formulation technology that you talked about. Tell us about that.
100% correct. And ENC formulation technology has been around for, oh my goodness, probably, I think 50 years. You've likely heard of the ENC brand, and you know what it brings to the table, especially if you're putting out any type of what we call, flash burn herbicides, some of our PPOs and stuff like that. For years and years and years, we've added ENC to that tank mix to help kind of just that overall health of that plant. So anyway, everybody's got an 1185, but they don't have that ENC formulation technology built into that thing. And you see a difference when you spray them side by side. If you take somebody else's 1185 and you spray it side by side with ENC or just our ENC with the ENC formulation technology built in, you will see a difference. And we knew that we had a real differentiator there. So when that light went off with Johnny that we talked about, and they started testing it and throwing it out there, and the things that brings to the table from an overall health aspect of that plant, making it a little bit healthier, but then driving more nutrients into that plant a little bit faster, a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently than some of your typical slow release nitrogens. You've just taken it to kind of that next level. I've had a couple of presentations throughout the country this spring, and one of the things I talk about is taking things to the next level, and why we've done things like add ENC formulation technology to it. Because if you look at our yields and the opportunities we've had through the years, we've gotten a lot better. But I still don't know if we've gotten to that championship level. I kind of compare Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, and that's been my favorite little thing, here. But you look at Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning had all the genetic potential, right?
Oh yeah.
But who's the greatest quarterback in history?
Right.
Tom Brady, because Tom Brady did the little things right. He wasn't just talking about calories in and calories out, which is what I talk about. And it's not just nutrients in and nutrients out. It's what goes along with those nutrients. So it's not just putting nitrogen on. Let's put a little ENC formulation technology to help drive that nitrogen into that plant. It's kind of like taking an extra vitamin or supplement. Tom Brady was real big into not just what type of food or what calories he put in, but what type of calories and at what time. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy. You think about, how he managed his lifestyle. That's Coron Metra kind of does that, helps manage the lifestyle for that crop.
Exactly right. And that's what I've been talking about. You're really all spring. It's just, me, I'm an old football guy, and I love it,
Yeah. It's really awesome. Okay, so, Coron Metra is one of those products, though. Some producers think, oh, great, if I'm short, I'm just going to throw a little of that on there. But, another approach that a lot of our Helena locations utilize is planning to use Coron Metra on the front end. So we can reduce some of our nitrogen inputs on the very front end. We're not saying replace everything at all with this product, but we can count on it because the efficiency factor really helps out and helps us better manage our resources and spoon feed that crop when it needs to be fed.
100%, no question. And I think that's a very important point there, Bill, is, you don't want, it's kind of like if you're, and I hate to keep going back to sports, but, if you're thinking about
that's
your
okay.
body,
a lot of our listeners love sports.
Okay, well, that's great.
Yeah.
So, but if you're thinking about, nutrition and timing of those things, you would never, ever eat breakfast, right? And that be your only meal of the day prior to a big sporting event, or if you're running a marathon or something like that. That wouldn't be the only thing you do. So why would we treat our crops like that? Why would we put all of our nutrients, up front? And even on corn, if you're talking nitrogen, I know we're coming back, we put some nitrogen out at starter and then we're going to come back at side dress. But you think about the number of days from side dress to VT to the final harvest of that corn crop. There's a lot of days in there that you still need to supplement some more nutrients to that plant. And we found, especially the way corn has changed, the hybrids have changed over the years. We've extended those life cycles out a lot longer. The addition of fungicides that we're doing, almost kind of a standard now, also extends that life out. And you look at these guys; they're wanting that plant to really be green at harvest, right? Or at least from the corn ear up. So you're going to need more nutrients for that, and you're going to have to deliver them at different timings. And I think that's important to your point. Let's back off. Maybe we don't eat the 2,000 calorie breakfast. We do the 1,000 calorie breakfast, come in with, 500, 600 or 700 calories at lunch. And then, we got a little snack there, around 4 or 5 o'clock to help us finish out the day.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to break it down, kind of in a common sense approach. And you touched on something that I think is really critical. The days of just dumping all of our fertilizer down in the late fall or early spring and wishing and hoping, we avoid a lot of environmental factors that we can't control, rain and, denitrification and so forth. But the evolution of genetics, it's changed the game. The germplasm that we're utilizing today is so different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. So as your germplasm and genetics change, your fertility plan needs to adjust as well. And Coron gives us the flexibility.
100%. Absolutely. No question. And then I go back to the old Tom Brady thing there too.
Sure.
And let me tell you something. Guys, thankfully this thing is not on video. I do not eat like Tom Brady.
Today.
Exactly. I can assure you I do not eat like Tom Brady, and I'm not an elite athlete. And I really feel like we're planting elite athletes today, and we're kind of planting that thoroughbred, and and you have got to feed them differently than you would just your normal type of person.
I think I keep coming back to sports. You and I love sports, and I think about even the high school athlete today is so different than they were 25 years ago, completely different. And Coron Metra is so different today than Coron was 25 years ago.
Absolutely. And to your point, we've been driving that home for a long time. And it kind of goes back to our quality control and our Coron blending and award programs is, we test every batch of Coron that comes into this. That we make. They send it here to Memphis and we test it. And we're looking for things like, the overall color and stuff like that, nutritional content, the guaranteed analysis, et cetera, pH, making sure we're all there.
Sure.
But one of the big things that we do too is our kind of our slow release technology, our slow release curve. And that's one thing that we see. And, a lot of folks out there, they say that, just like Helena, only cheaper or whatever. But sometimes when we're testing that, their slow release curve is a little bit off. And that can really cause you some issues there, because you think about it, if you're trying to really time that application for the right time, to stretch it out a little bit, you don't want to stretch it out too long. And you also don't want to dump it in all at one time. So you want to have that kind of that ratio of get some into the plant that it needs it now, and then also extend that out over a couple of weeks. Because here's the thing: let's think if the plant is really, really hungry right now, but you've got like 70% of your nitrogen is slow release. Well, guess what? It's going to stay hungry until it starts coming out of there.
Right.
So you've got to kind of balance that. And honestly, we're doing that today with some of our new products that are coming. We changed our slow release portion of that product because we realized that, maybe we weren't putting that in at the right time where we needed it to be. So again, those are things that you've got to take into account. And that's why we test every batch, because we want to make sure we feel like we've got that corn crop dialed in. We know exactly, hey, this is the amount that we need to hit right now, and then stretch the other 50% or so over a period of a few weeks, right?
Right.
But some of our other folks, they're not testing that. And if you don't really follow that and test every batch, guess what is going to happen? You're going to end up with a hungry corn crop, and then your corn crop is going to get that extra nitrogen when it's already past the point that it needs it.
Yeah, I think that's so important to share with our listeners, that the quality with Coron Metra is really consistent and amazing. While we do produce Coron Metra in multiple locations throughout really the world, it's a global product and proven.
Yes.
We have that consistency, whether it's produced in South Carolina or if it's produced in California or Iowa, it's the same Coron Metra.
Absolutely, no question. And like I said, we're testing every one of them. We just had our awards this week from 2024, and every one of our award winners scored over a 99 percentile.
Wow.
Meaning that they missed very few marks. And to be honest with you, when they missed it, a lot of times it was, if we're at, say, our 25, Coron Metra 25, we have a plus or minus that they can't be over more than 25.5%. Because then you start messing with that ratio.
Right.
And when they missed it, it was like they're at 25.55%, so
it's really almost insignificant.
It really is. But still, hey, look, it's about doing those little things right, just like our growers have to do the little things right. And we expect those guys and gals to really put a quality product on the table for those farmers and growers and customers that we have, and they do. So,
what's neat, Jason, is when we do tours here at the Helena Products Group, we take folks back to our retaining station back there, laboratory, which is very unique. And we show, I had a group back there just this week showing the 2024 samples that were still being retained, and that was just half of them, and it's a huge room.
It's amazing. It's like a Christmas tree room. You got that kind of that Coron green, and you walk in, and it almost just like overwhelms you, to be honest with you. But I mean, that's just part of our quality control, that we're just going to continue doing, because we know how important it is and how widely recognized that Coron brand name is.
Sure.
And when you get that wide recognition, people expect a certain quality, and we're going to deliver on that 100% of the time.
And that's something that a lot of, I think, competitors don't talk about, is the consistency and the quality. And like you just mentioned, you had some awards for formulation for our partners that formulate Coron Metra, and they're committed.
Absolutely.
They're committed. They want to win these awards.
It is, when those guys get together, at a dinner, they're talking about who won this year, or we're going to win next year, or, it's almost, there's a little bit of possibly maybe a little bet here too. You'll tell next year, I mean, but we love that. I mean, we love competition, we love to, and that drives those guys and gals out there to be the best. I mean, everybody really at Helena tries to give their all each and every day, but sometimes you need just a little bit extra,
little friendly competitiveness there to become great.
Exactly.
That's the goal. Everybody's getting better by that competitiveness, isn't
Absolutely. Yeah. And our growers, they do the same thing. They really do.
Yep.
We've got I tell you, I shouldn't even tell the story. I tell the story of one of my salesmen that I used to work with a long time ago. One of his customers came in one day and he wasn't there, and he was saying that old boy. I'm not going to say his name. He said, but he's smart. He says, what's his name over here is doing this, or what's his name over here is doing that. He said, hell, he knows I ain't gonna let him beat me, so guess what? I'm doing it too. So.
Producers love competitiveness, just no different than some of our internal folks that are creating Coron Metra across the globe on a daily basis. Okay, Jason, we talked a little bit about the weather this year and in 25, and it's kind of all over the board, no matter where you live. This is a good year for growers that aren't aware of Coron Metra to really talk to their Helena representative to say, hey, do I need to consider this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I think that's important to have that conversation, especially this year. And even if you are aware of it,
sure.
I think you'd have that conversation again and say, hey, look, do I really need to look at not just Coron or doing what I typically do, but maybe this is the year that maybe I go 2 gallons instead of 1 gallon. And I know, with commodity prices where we are, those guys get a little concerned about that. I get that.
Sure.
But at the same time, if you've put some stuff out there and it has leached, you do not want to limit your yield, because that's the only way, right, to really truly return on investment is to make sure you're getting the yields per acre that you need to get, right?
Yep.
Or is it a opportunity too where maybe, should I do Coron Metra 25B? I've always done that on corn, but boy, I tell you, I feel like maybe our potassium's leached a lot more this year. Maybe we ought to do an extractor deal real quick, and maybe we should look at doing some Coron Metra 25, or even, putting a little bit of K-Leaf Versa with our Coron Metra 25 just to make sure. So I would definitively, in a year like this, have that conversation with your Helena representatives to say, all right, we've always done it this way, but is this a year that maybe we ought to look at doing it that way?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's important to have the conversation, because this is one of those unique years too where, fertility is going to be all over the board. Prices for fertilizers all over, availabilities all over the board. There's a lot of stuff happening in the marketplace, and I know growers are really, really watching, their investments for their crops. But don't count Coron out. Coron can actually be pretty effective and financially fit your portfolio this year, and every year for that matter, especially when you consider the efficiency factor.
Absolutely. No question. Coron can do amazing things. Mm-hmm. And honestly, we would never tell you to do this, but sometimes some things happen and you almost have to deliver a lot of your nitrogen via Coron. Maybe your corn got so high before you could even get out there with a second shot of side dress, and
sure.
And again, you would not want to do that year in and year out, but it delivers on some opportunities when you have to do things kind of unnaturally too. So
right.
It's a building block that can be used in a lot of different ways.
Well, and there's specific timings with Coron Metra too. We're talking a lot about corn here, but other crops as well. But as relates to corn, you talked about, hey, maybe side dress. This might be an option for that time with maybe you're coming in with a post herbicide. But let's not forget about the fungicide applications too that are out there, and even insecticides if needed.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just like a standard. I tell my uncle, he's retired now, but I would never in a million years spray a fungicide without putting Coron out. Mm-hmm. The ability to help drive that fungicide into the plant,
right.
With our controlled release nitrogen and get it in there, just makes it more effective. I've also seen how the weight of Coron using it as a carrier will help to drive that into that mid and lower canopy too, as well, and just get it across the whole plant. So it's one of those things that it's I shouldn't say it out loud. I'm going to one of our guys gave me a T-shirt right after I started this role. It says you're a moron if you're not using Coron. So, no offense.
Yeah. Well, to your point though, it is really evolved. Coron's evolved with the Metra and with that ENC formulation technology in there today. The grower's getting way more bang for their buck than they may have experienced, 20 years ago. So if you haven't experienced Coron Metra, boy, now's the year to really, give it a shot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point, let me say one more thing. Let's say that 25 years ago you used Coron.
Yeah.
And you say, that stuff doesn't work. You know what? Maybe it is time to go ahead and give it one more try.
Right.
Maybe you did have a bad experience. Maybe your hybrids weren't ready for Coron at the time.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Maybe you didn't have the things. I think you really got to evaluate that we are planting a different hybrid. And I think it's time to, even if you said, well, I've used it before, it didn't work. Again, you're not planting the same hybrid that your daddy was planting.
Well, and to your point, technology's advanced, with extractor kind of in the fold too. Boy, we have a lot more science, a lot more experience, timing. We understand genetics even better than we did 20 years ago. Boy, Coron Metra is a great product for growers to really consider this season.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm here in Memphis, because I just love it so much. I get passionate about it. So.
Yep, that's awesome. Well, Jason Gregory, thanks for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink as we talk about Coron Metra and the value that it brings, not just corn growers, but all growers.
Absolutely. Corn, cotton, soybeans, you name it, wheat.
Yep.
Just don't forget about wheat.
That's right. Yeah, Coron Metra is a great product for all crops.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Bill.
And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith, and joining us is Jody Lawrence. Jody, boy, we got some things that are hopping in the commodity world. We've got some awesome weather in some parts of the country and some challenging weather in other parts. But hey, how are the markets reacting to all this weather change and all this talk still about tariffs?
Well, the biggest thing that we're dealing with right now, and by the way, happy late Memorial Day to everybody, and thank you for everyone who served, and the ultimate respect for everyone that has a family member who did give the ultimate price. So I want to get that out there first. But the markets really are more reacting to two different things. Unfortunately, it's not bullish, but nor is it overly bearish right now, because there's optimism that we're going to kind of get blindsided by a trade deal that's much bigger than we expect, because you keep seeing these kind of fringe signals, like when Trump decided last week to extend the EU tariff, date into July, after literally almost a day and a half after he said that he was raising it to 50% because they weren't negotiating quickly enough. So there's so much uncertainty now when you look at the trade, the tariffs, and what's going on there. Obviously, we can, the biggest part of it, where you want to be really positive and be hopeful about it, is if they get a few of these trade deal done, you go EU, you go Mexico, and China certainly is the big piece in this.
Right.
But that could take all summer, if not the rest of the year, to negotiate to get back to the phase 2 deal from 2020, phase 1. But if you can just start to get these smaller deals that begin to chip away at what is, a crop that in 90% of the country is off to an exceptional start. So those are really the cross currents that we're dealing with now. And if you look at corn's down a little bit this morning, but if you look at yesterday's close, you're sitting basically right where we were when we started the year. And we've been down 20 cents and up 20 cents from the start of the year. But right now we're just kind of standing pat on where we started 25. And that tells you kind of the uncertainty of it, because you've got a lot of range bound when you're talking about corn and beans. But you have to look at this really again, and we talked about this a lot last year, just what a great job the industry is doing, because you look at the really, really challenging weather, way too much rain, that southern Indiana, southern Illinois, almost all of Ohio, and then you go to western Kentucky, western Tennessee, the Delta, that the crop came in yesterday at 78% planted, and it's an impressive number regardless. But the interesting number that came out with that, the initial corn rating at 68%, is that that is the 5-year average, and that is the long-term average for the initial crop rating. And it doesn't correlate great to, is this going to be, a record-setting crop, or is this going to fall a little bit below trend? But it is interesting because everybody was looking for, when you talk about Iowa's corn good excellent rating yesterday was at 83%.
Wow, 83.
When you just say that, when your largest producer is off to one of the best starts that they've ever had, you have to, while I'm incredibly sympathetic because we've been living through all the rain in Tennessee,
Sure.
to everybody that's behind on planting, the trade is taking the big picture view, especially when you look at it that, okay, you get 10 days and it's amazing how much of this crop can go in the ground. And it is trending drier into early June as we sit here on the 28th. So, there's some good news as far as the crop's in great shape, which everybody in the industry wants. I've never met a farmer who wanted an average crop. So, right. But there also the flip side to that, the double-edged sword, is always, if the crop looks great and if it's off to a good start, why would we keep weather premium in the market or any right. risk or a lot of risk premium? Because the crop's in really, really good shape.
Yeah, and I think that's hard for some producers, depending upon where you're at. If you're in the Delta, if you're in Arkansas, you're having some serious weather issues there. But to your point, when you get up into the Midwest, from the corn crop standpoint, things look pretty good. 83% planted and looking decent up in Iowa, which that doesn't happen at the end of May every year. So some good progress there. And Jody, let's step back a little bit. You referenced the EU. I believe that those tariffs have been pushed to July. Is that right? July 9th, I believe?
I believe it's July 9th, yes.
Yeah. So, the impact of that news alone, as you mentioned, boy, that could free some things up, some discussions there that have, changed the tune a little bit for a lot of producers and the market.
Absolutely, because let's just take, a huge market that we all follow, the Dow, on that news coming out of the Memorial Day holiday yesterday, Tuesday, the 27th, was up 800 points, largely because of that, because there was no other really major breaking news or a great unemployment number or anything. So we know that the seeds are being spread out there that if these trade deals can get done, we've got plenty of people who want to be bullish the equities. They want to be bullish raw materials. Yep. And part of the raw material picture is that this administration is really, really working hard on setting up the landscape for a weaker U.S. dollar, and a weaker U.S. dollar almost always historically has meant more raw material demand from around the world, because their currency can now buy more of a U.S. product, whether it's corn, beans, wheat, cattle, beef, right. pork. You just kind of pick it, and then it goes around like that. So the dollar is also something we're trying to follow very closely to see how they can balance let's make sure we don't have any inflation, but let's make sure the stock market still is going up, and that we have all, the big new beautiful bill of tax cuts and trade deals. Right. With some of our major partners, because that's the murkiness of the water right now, that I would love to have an answer for just one of them. And right. If that one was China, then we would really have a very firm foundation to move forward with, even if we have the potential of a record U.S. crop.
Yeah. Jody, kind of staying on this topic of trade, we've got some rumors running around, the marketplace, talking about some positive news, finally, for our cotton producers. There might be some options there that could incentivize cotton producers and really nudge that market a little bit. What are you picking up?
One of the more interesting pieces of information, and it's kind of let's start connecting some dots with these trade deals, I've heard from several people inside the cotton industry is that when we're negotiating with all of our normal big buyers of U.S. cotton that turn it into, we'll just say clothing. Obviously, it goes into a lot of other stuff, but we'll just talk clothing on this. When you talk about China, when you talk about Southeast Asia, India figures into this also, that part of what the trade teams are really trying to push is that if we get a trade deal, you are going to buy all U.S. cotton because we have massive old crop ending stocks just still sitting in warehouses. And if that were to happen, and you had Thailand, you had India, you had China come in and basically buy the cupboard bare of U.S. cotton, cotton would be a dynamic market immediately. And that's what, and that, dynamic part of it, when you start talking about a big trade deal, all of a sudden, if cotton takes off, those the guys that want to move to cotton, corn and beans have to go with that to make sure that they get their fair share of it, even though, we just barely started the 25 crop when you look down the road at 26 crops. So one of these markets taking off is going to benefit everybody. And the cotton story is not too terribly, like, oh, wow, in a perfect world, this would be fantastic if it happened. Not saying it's going to be easy or fast, but if a deal like that was put together, we would see the market go, holy cow, if he can do this, or all the trade team, he not being just President Trump, but all the trade teams and negotiations, then if we got something like that for cotton, certainly we can get something like that for corn and beans and wheat. And what can we do on, domestic demand for the biofuel industry? So again, there are pockets of this that we could be really, really optimistic about. And we're not talking, $1.25 cotton or, $15 beans or $7 corn, but we're certainly talking about prices much above break even.
Well, more importantly, we're talking about opening a market. That's what we're really talking about is creating a market demand for a product that we certainly have a lot of supply on.
Exactly. And, this goes back to the industry. Everybody's been doing such a good job for so long that we've got Brazil's going to have a huge increase year over year in their corn production and another record crop, another record yield to add on to that. But when everybody does their job, when the technology's there, when the genetics there, and Mother Nature, just shows up in pretty good shape, the farmers all around the world, led by the American farmer, can produce so much now that we're getting to a point where we have to find the demand drivers to catch up to an industry who has made huge leaps forward really since COVID, just in the last 5 years.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Jody, let's pivot on a little bit here. Let's talk policy. We've had some news out of Washington and specifically the EPA making some decisions, some comments around biofuels. What you picking up there, Jody?
Well, unfortunately, all the industries, the sustainable aviation fuel, the ethanol, biodiesel, everybody, when they submitted their plans to the EPA, they asked for significant increases over the previous standards and minimums or the mandates that the EPA had set in previous administrations. And those numbers, you can go back to the day when it was announced. Bean oil shot up almost, $4 a pound, and beans followed that. Everything went with it on the hope that, hey, they're going to follow the industry recommendation. But it turns out that it's becoming more and more obvious that the EPA is not going to follow those recommendations. They're going to be significantly less, probably 75% of what the industry asked for. And that really takes out, and we keep talking, we're frustrated with the whole sustainable aviation fuel industry, because we've been talking about it for 3 or 4 years that this could be the next ethanol. But this administration is a drill baby drill and not necessarily behind it right now. Things can obviously change because people like to get reelected. So we'll see where this goes. But right now, the EPA on this front is not doing anything bullish for the demand picture.
Yeah. Well, that's a rough news for corn and soybean producers, obviously, and the biofuel side of things. But, it isn't all over yet. Those are just certainly some recommendations at this point. But, Jody, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink, sharing some insight as Plant 25 continues to roll down the road here. We're like you say, about 78% planted across the U.S. for the corn and soybean crops. So a little bit more to go, but having pretty good progress for the most part.
Absolutely, and the crop's coming out great, except in the wettest areas where there will be some pre-plant, and we'll just have to see if there is any prevent plant in that lower Ohio Valley and in the Delta.
All right, Jody, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Learn more about Coron Metra from your Helena representative, or check us out at helenaagra.com.